Welcome to the Rare Element Podcast. I'm your host, Lucy Vaughn. Today I'm talking with Nikolas Schreck about his young life, growing up, traveling the world, how he first entered the occult, and the story of meeting Anton and Zeena LaVey. We dig into the hidden history behind the Church of Satan and the Satanic Bible, his real-life experience with the real Satan. It's sure to be shocking. We leave off on a striking topic about how Lucifer and the feminine are connected. Here's part 1 of a 2-part interview. Let's step into it. Hi, Nikolas.
Hello there. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm so excited to have you on here and dive into your magical, exciting life.
I'm even more excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Of course, you have to invite a supernatural creature in before it can appear, so I accept your invitation.
Well, thank you for coming. So let's get started talking about your life, your young life, where you were born,
Right.
family life.
Right. I was born in New York, but grew up all over the country because my father was in the Navy and he was also a very adventurous and bohemian person. So we constantly moved all over the place. So I grew up in New England, Florida, Virginia, and finally moved to California in 1976. And then I grew up on Venice Beach for the most part, my teenage years, and we're in Venice and Hollywood. So that we traveled constantly too. My father was a military historian and an amateur archaeologist, so we often went to Mexico to temples and ruins of ancient Mayan and Aztec pyramids and structures. His idea of a vacation was to go to battlefields, so we'd go to Waterloo or Gettysburg. So really, my characteristic of my youth was constant travel, constantly going to new places, and consequently, I've never really had a sense of home or that I belong in any particular place.
Sounds like you were very educated and very versed in the world at a young age then.
I think my parents very much wanted to expose me to the whole wide world. I learned far more from them and the experiences we had traveling, going to museums and, historic places than I ever learned in school.
I always say the best education you can give your kids or give yourself is traveling.
Oh, absolutely.
You learn so much more in depth.
Yeah, and still I don't really feel like I have a home because of the way I was raised. I'm as comfortable here as I would be in Mongolia or New Jersey or Barcelona. I feel, and I suppose another thing is I don't really feel like I'm from this world or this earth. So I just feel like I'm passing through, I'm visiting. So I have a kind of alien perspective to the whole planet and to humanity. But that's a very important part of my initiation and this being that I have become in this incarnation is this constant wanderlust and travel and going from one place to the other.
Do you think that feeling is because you grew up in a home that didn't have religion or that wasn't really confined to structure, as in such spirituality or anything like that?
It's like a chicken and the egg thing, or nature or nurture. I think it is our karma to be born into certain consequences and conditions in our life that are similar to the life that we had before. So I'm sure I've always been a wanderer and a traveler. And so then you get born into a family that tends to be that way. Also, the god Set, who is very important to my initiation, is a god of crossing borders, of liminal spaces, of thresholds. He's neither here nor there. He's constantly, in motion. He's not in any one place. And that is such an important part of my spiritual life. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Interesting.
So I think, like in everything in life, our karma determines what the circumstances of our life will be. And then, we tend to return to situations that we have already been familiar with. So I'm very sure that that's the case.
And what was like your family life with your parents, if they were always traveling?
Well, when I think of my youth, it is like a perpetual motion, constantly traveling very much to historic places. My father was very interested in history, so, and he was particularly fascinated with Napoleon and battles and military history. So, and he was a combat veteran. He had been in D-Day. He was wounded in D-Day. He volunteered for dangerous duty after he was wounded and ended up on one of the first ships that was sent to Nagasaki, where the atom bomb the second atom bomb had been dropped. And he often joked that I came out like I did because of the radiation from the atom bomb. So, also, my family was very connected to music and musicians. So we always had music around us. For instance, the first time I played a piano, the keyboard as my main instrument, was on a stage in Las Vegas where Count Basie was playing. He was the orchestra for Frank Sinatra. And Basie put me on his lap when I was a little kid and showed me the first chords I ever played. The first time I held a microphone, Peter Noon of the British invasion band Herman's Hermits brought me on stage when they were doing a dress rehearsal for their concert and showed me how to hold a microphone. So
how exciting.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that's important to my spiritual development is my parents themselves were outsiders and bohemians. My father was kind of a proto-beatnik. Before the hippies, there was the beatnik movement. Even in the early 60s, before the hippies adopted it, he was taking LSD and experimenting with psychedelics when it was still legal, before it became a Class A narcotic. So there was that too, the awareness of spirituality, and because they were very much against organized religion of all kinds, but they were spiritual. And another thing, I think most people who become interested in occultism or magic are very often rebelling against a repressive background. Wouldn't you say that many of the people you've interviewed on the topic are usually from a restrictive background?
Yeah, somewhat the majority.
Yeah. So on the contrary, my parents were extremely tolerant of all of my extreme eccentricities and idiosyncrasies. So, when I became fascinated with occultism and black magic and diabolism at a very early age, they didn't discourage me. If I wanted black candles, then I got black candles. There was never any sense that I'm doing something wrong or that it's forbidden. And I was raised with no sense of the taboo. So, drugs drugs did not have any kind of amazing appeal to me as it is for many young people, because they were just an ordinary part of life. They weren't forbidden fruit. So my parents were very open about sexuality. They had an open relationship, which I was aware of. So I was raised like on another planet that had very little to do. I mean, of course, the counterculture was happening. This was the 60s and 70s. But they were somewhat extreme even for their time. And then that, in going to school, led to a great deal of conflict with the conventional social strictures of American life. It was kind of like the Addams Family. The teachers would be shocked by the things I said I believed, and even if let's say in an English class they would give you homework, use this word in a sentence. Somehow it would be about demons or serial killers or some. I mean, I deliberately pushed the envelope in school, and I felt school was kind of like a prison. and my attitude was like a rebellious prisoner against the warden.
It sounds like you were pretty free at home to explore who you wanted to be. And then school kind of added restrictions on that.
Yes, and I remember even the first day of school, I couldn't believe they were telling me what to do. Like, now you have to take a nap, now you have that. And I remember saying to my mother, who do these people think they are, telling me what to do? And I have remained that way. And so, yeah, as far as my youth, if that's what you're getting at, another important thing is that because the only things I were interested in school was music, art, literature, and theater. That otherwise I ignored it completely. And as soon as I found out you could get out of school early with this equivalency test, I did. And I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a musician, a writer, a filmmaker, all of that very early on. So I thought, why am I locked into this very repressive brainwashing factory, as I saw it?
Yeah.
So I began my adult life very early because of that.
When did you really start getting into the occult world?
Well, it sounds like hyperbole or an exaggeration, but honestly, immediately upon coming to this planet, to this world, I knew from even before I could find the words to articulate it. I was aware of magic. I was aware of the supernatural. I can't remember not being aware of it. And I've said this before in interviews, my earliest thoughts when I was like a toddler was, where am I? What is this place? This is the wrong place. Somehow I've come to the wrong place. What are these beings, humans? I couldn't relate to them. I looked at them with like astonishment. What are these creatures? And I still feel that way. I've become accustomed to it, but I am definitely not from this world. And I was very aware of that, and I've become more aware of it all the time.
Do you know where you think you're from?
No, not really. I mean, I think we come from many places because we have memories of millions of past lives, but I think I haven't been very often in the human realm. Yeah, and because of that, I often feel like I'm only halfway here. I'm in the spiritual world more than I am here in this material world, which is a challenge. It can be difficult to maneuver that.
So let's go back into how you getting into music and film, and then how that kind of went into like the Church of Satan and your relationship with Zeena.
Well, I would say my relationship to music and film was hand in hand with my interest in the supernatural and magic. And I always instinctively understood that music and acting and writing and all artistic endeavor is essentially magical. And I remember there was an interview with William S. Burroughs, the writer, in a 1975 issue of the music magazine Crawdaddy that I read, in which he was talking about how art began as a spiritual practice, like singing began as prayer. Art began as the cave artworks of the earliest humans is basically magical in nature. So I was always very deeply aware of that. Burroughs and anger affected me a great deal in my youth, this idea that art is magical. I can't really say that affected my eventually connecting to the Church of Satan particularly, but yeah, how I met Zeena is definitely connected to music and art and performance. Zeena, I already had a crush on her before I met her, from seeing her on television. And then she saw me on television and had a crush on me even before we met. So we already had a predisposition to becoming involved. And weirdly, we often, like, there was if you look him up, a guy named Samson DeGreer, who was a friend of Kenneth Anger, and he was in the movie Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. And he lived out in Hollywood. And I looked at a house that Kenneth Anger eventually moved into, a guest cottage on his property. And I was going to move into it. And Zeena, though we didn't even know each other years before we met, at the same time was looking at that same property. So we were always like around the corner from each other. And the way we met is I befriended Anton LaVey in 1988 when I was interviewing him for a book called The Demonic Revolution, which I ultimately decided not to publish, but which was an analysis of the occult world of the 80s during the Satanic Panic. And I was at the Black House one night, and Zeena happened to call him, and Anton said to her on the phone, Nikolas is giving a concert here in San Francisco. And she said, oh, ask him if I can come to it. And I said, in my usual smart-ass way, tell her, absolutely not, I don't want her there. And so that was how our relationship began. She came to this concert, which was in May of 1988, and we, like I said, we already were interested in each other, but it was love at first sight, and immediately began, very turbulent and spiritual forces were awakened in our life. One interesting thing about our meeting, right before, in 1988 in San Francisco, there was a fan of my music. And he was writing to my home address, and I never knew how he got my home address. I lived in the Tenderloin with my girlfriend at the time. And he would write these fan letters that were kind of sycophantic and flattering, like praising and complimenting me. But then there would be a nasty edge to it, like a little bit insulting. Like, oh, you think you're so evil, but I'm really evil. And I didn't think much of it. You get a lot of nutty letters in my profession. And then almost at the moment that Zeena and I met at this concert in Berkeley, California, in the venue, this very polite, I can only say beta male, came up to me and very politely said, oh, hi, I'm so-and-so. And I said, oh, this is the guy who is writing these kind of pseudo-threatening letters. And he just seemed like the most harmless nerd you could imagine. And that was the moment that Zeena and I met. He was there, like, shaking my hand, and I think he had me sign something. And I thought, oh, this is the thing. There's always more in life that is going on, especially if you were on the path of initiation, then you know. And as it turned out, we learned later, he was actually murdering people at that time. He was a serial killer. And we only learned that later. A friend of ours in Los Angeles would send us newspaper clippings of macabre and bizarre things when we had moved to Austria. And there was a report about his arrest and the murders he was committing at that very time. So that's the way my life has always been. And as you know, as we discussed, is again, that crime and the dark side of life is always there. And one thing I've learned is you never know where it will be or what it will be. But that's an example of it, is that he seemed like the most harmless, inconsequential person in the world. And he...
You know what? They told me to be quiet. They said power is dangerous. So you know what? I made it look good. Everything I create begins with one belief, that beauty and power were never meant to be separated, that desire isn't dirty or dangerous, it's divine. They said original sin was the fall of mankind, but it turns out it was just the rise of woman. I learned that good was just another word for small. I don't do nice. I do honest. I do beautiful. I do whatever the hell I want. Every collection I create, every word I write, is a middle finger wrapped in velvet. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. You're waking up, dear. Babe, this collection is for those who dare to feel deeply and live without apology. If you know what that feels like, then you know what? You already belong here. This is Original Sin, where power gets dressed in red and truth always looks better in heels. Visit LucyVaughn.com to discover Original Sin, the collection, the movement, the services, the awakening, and see what they tried to warn you about. What do you think about some of these murderers? They don't find out they were even murderers till like 20 years after they passed away, and they find the bodies and there was some innocent looking person.
Oh yeah, it happens. Well, the idea that evil or violence only comes from people who look like a stereotyped villain couldn't be wronger. You never know who anybody is or what anybody is or what's going on under the surface. And that's a very important part of understanding spiritual initiation, to look beneath the surface and to go into every experience in life understanding that there's much more going on than we think. And even within ourselves, we don't know ourselves ultimately. We don't know our own unconscious processes or what drives us to do the things we do. I mean, if we're on a spiritual path, we should examine that. But I think it's important for anyone who's entering a path of initiation to have an awareness of the mystery of life. That we think we know what's going on. We think we impose a simple narrative on our experiences, but we don't really know what's going on.
Interesting. On that note,
yes,
I know you're very famous for being a part of the Church of Satan at one period in time.
Right.
Yet, and I've also worked with some people that are part of the Church of Satan and people that really have admired Anton LaVey in that era.
Right.
But I've also learned some of the underlying stories from family and all that stuff that were a part of it. So what is your experience? Do you have to say
of the Church of Satan? Well, I should say, first of all, I gave a very comprehensive interview about that subject, and your viewers can watch that. It's on a podcast called Lantern Bridge, and it's about my contentious relationship with my former father-in-law, Anton LaVey. Because of the way that kind of right-wing conspiracy theorists present this very simplistic idea of me, and they're not even aware of any of the complexities of my career or my life. First of all, and I've said this before, but I should make it clear, I was an honorary member of the Church of Satan. Anton LaVey gave me an honorary membership card. I never joined it. I never wanted to join it. I never felt attracted to the Church of Satan. I became his friend by interviewing him for this book. We became friendly about other things than Satanism because we really didn't agree about the devil or Satan. Because I very strongly and still know that the devil is a real being, and I know that the supernatural and the metaphysical world is very real. He did not believe the devil was a real being. And I'm surprised at how few people know that. So we didn't agree on religious principles at all. We were interested in the organ. We both played the organ. We were interested in silent cinema. We were interested in similar classical music or writers like Gabriel D'Annunzio, military history. We had those things in common. but I didn't get involved with Anton because of the satanic philosophy whatsoever. And I never joined the Church of Satan. And if you look online and you see old interviews with me, and Christians are fanatically hallucinating about the meaning of them, they'll say I was a leader in the Church of Satan. I was not. I was not even a member. Mm-hmm. I had no administrative role in it, and nor would I have wanted one. Mm-hmm. And if I had not fallen in love with his daughter, Zeena, I wouldn't have been a part of it at all. Mm-hmm. So that's very important to know. And I don't want to waste a lot of time talking about what I've talked about a lot, but the main thing is, as I was interviewing Anton, I'd go to the Black House very often late at night, and with my girlfriend at the time, and I would interview him. And in good faith, I would try to figure out what his life was. And as I looked into it, I found that he was lying about almost everything. He was not a police photographer. Mm-hmm. He was not a lion tamer. He was not in Rosemary's Baby. So eventually, and I wasn't really trying to expose him. I was actually just trying to write objectively about him in this chapter that would have been in my book. Mm-hmm. And there was nothing, it was like all fiction. It was all a figment of his imagination. Mm-hmm. And as I remember my girlfriend and I thought, well, we're getting involved in the Church of Satan. There'll be orgies and rituals and, all kinds of flamboyant magical activities. There was nothing of the kind. Mm-hmm. There was a bitter, sort of depressed guy, remembering his glory years, and he was an agoraphobic. He was not some social Darwinist Superman conquering the world. He was a very isolated figure, locked in, more like Roderick Usher in The Fall of the House of Usher. Mm-hmm. It was hard to get him to leave his house.
Interesting.
So I couldn't possibly get across to you, maybe a little bit from the people you encountered, how much he is the opposite of this, satanic Superman idea. He was not an adventurous person. He was a very timid, cowardly person who lived like a snail in the shell of the Black House.
Yeah. I'd like for you to share the story of how the Satanic Bible came to be, because I think that's a fascinating story that I found fascinating when I heard it.
Well, it's indicative of the true nature, the opportunistic nature of Anton's career, such as it was. People looking at Satanism now think Anton LaVey started it, and in 1966, before that, there had been no such thing, and that was partly his propaganda. But I remember what the 60s were like, and what really kicked off the satanic interest in the 60s and the counterculture was the film Rosemary's Baby in 1968 by Roman Polanski, which was about, if people haven't seen it, about a woman who is impregnated by the devil to give birth to the devil's son and to usher in a satanic age. And the popularity of the novel, which was a best-selling novel by the author Ira Levin, and then the film became a sort of pop cultural phenomenon, led to people becoming interested in witchcraft and Satanism at a time when young people were taking psychedelics and Eastern mysticism and all kinds of alternative religions, to use the phrase, were becoming very trendy and popular. And Satanism sort of added to that mix. And you have to remember, too, the Rolling Stones had, in that same year, did the song Sympathy for the Devil, which was a pro-devil song, which is unheard of in pop music. If you think how what pop music was in 1958, 10 years later, and you have Mick Jagger singing a positive song about the devil, there was a lot more going on in the pop cultural zeitgeist than the Church of Satan. Mm-hmm. And so, because of the popularity of Rosemary's Baby, Avon Books, a paperback publishing house, approached Anton, who at that time was a local San Francisco phenomenon, not really known outside of San Francisco. And most of the coverage that he got was in nudie magazines that showed, these half-naked girls who were satanic witches. It wasn't very dignified or on any high level at all. And so Avon Books had an idea to cash in on the satanic interest in pop culture, a book that they already had the title, The Bible of Satan. And so they commissioned Anton, can you write a book with that title? They already had what the cover would be. It was, it wasn't his idea. He wasn't some visionary that was starting a religion. He was a guy who had a little local interest, and they wanted to publicize, that. So his common law partner, not his wife, Diane LaVey, was never married to Anton. She did all the work. He was always lazy. So she put together some newsletters of this newsletter called The Cloven Hoof, which was the Church of Satan's newsletter. And she filled it with filler, basically, like Enochian from John Dee's Enochian Keys, except sort of adding the devil to it arbitrarily, which makes no sense because John Dee was a very pious Christian. He was communicating with angels. He could not have been more Christian. He had a list of the names of the devil in different cultures. It was filler. There's a lot of empty pages with symbols on them. So it's important to know it wasn't even his idea. He was paid to create this commissioned work, and he did it hastily. And I never thought it was a very substantial book. I remember reading it in 1969 when it came out, looking at it in a occult bookstore in Boston. And I didn't like it because it was saying the devil is not real. And I already knew for sure that the devil was real from a very young age. So, yeah. And then I don't want to waste our whole interview rehashing this, but it isn't so much about Satanism, is that he was an abusive, selfish, narcissistic, violent, and brutal person who caused a lot of damage to his family. And his philosophy, I do not think, is in any way positive or good. I think his hatred of spirituality is a dead end for people who are really looking into metaphysical truth. And his cynicism about everything is more of a symptom of his chronic depression than any kind of wisdom. And then, and I get many Church of Satan people don't seem to care that none of his supposed accomplishments are real. I mean, he wasn't a police photographer. He didn't work in the circus. He didn't, he was just lying. The Black House was not Mammy Pleasant's secret brothel filled with secret passageways. It was his parents' house that they let him have when he was a lounge organist, which is really the only job he ever had. He was a lounge organist at a bar called the Lost Weekend. And I know some people who admire him think, wow, isn't that great that he conned everybody, but I'm not impressed with that.
Yeah. No, I think I found more magic in the names that were referenced in the Satanic Bible than from like the actual structure of it.
Right. Well, it's kind of a strange paradox in the names of satanic beings. It has Kali and Seth and real gods, but he claimed not to believe in gods or the supernatural at all. So yeah.
Interesting. Were you part of an interesting part of history?
Well, many interesting parts of history. Not only that one, but that of course gets a lot of attention because of the whole sensational mystique about it.
Yeah. Well, I find it very fascinating that there's a lot of groups out there that really try to remake that time of history.
Right.
But I'd say one of those things that just can't be remade.
Well, it was so much a creature of its time. And I think an important distinguishing feature about the Church of Satan, when it began in the 60s in San Francisco, there was a 60s phrase called a put on. It was like a prank almost. It was like, wouldn't it be funny? It's hard to think of now that it's so encrusted with these legends and mystique. It was like a funny thing at a cocktail party to say, look, I have a membership card to a church of Satan. Try to think of it from the point of view of that time.
Yeah.
It was like a gag, like a zany 60s countercultural thing to do. It wasn't very serious.
So let's touch on the fact that you believe the devil is a real
Absolutely.
being?
Absolutely. I don't believe it. I know it. I have encountered the devil. I have seen the devil. I know that it is a real being, but it is not what I used to think it was, and it is not what most Christians or Satanists believe it to be. As I get into in my book, The Satanic Scream, I felt it was necessary to write an introductory chapter that explains exactly what the devil is. So I have not the slightest doubt that it's a real being, but it's not even remotely what people think it is.
And would you like to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, in essence, if you really look at scripture and all of the Abrahamic tradition about this being, first of all, in Hebrew, the name is Ha-Satan, the Satan. It is a title for a being. It is not a name. So many misunderstandings swirl around this, which are mostly folklore or popular wisdom that really are not based in any kind of metaphysical truth. For instance, the name Lucifer is not referring to the same being as the Satan. Lucifer is a mistranslation. Actually, in the Bible, what's being referred to is a Babylonian king. And it's a metaphor. It's saying, how art thou fallen from heaven, Lucifer? And it's actually in the Old Testament, it's making fun of a Babylonian king's demise. It has nothing to do with the devil. And maybe the best way to say it, the snake in the Garden of Eden is not the devil. There's absolutely nothing really connecting that to the Satan or the devil. It's a snake, and it even in the Gnostic literature, the snake is a positive being that brings knowledge. So what happened is the Catholic Church and some of the apocalyptic early fathers took these disparate stories in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and added forced them to be about the devil. So the serpent in the Garden of Eden is not the devil. Lucifer is not the devil. There are very scant references to the Satan in the Bible. For instance, Jesus in the desert, in his 40 days in the desert, encounters the Satan who tempts him. And this is my experience, and this is what I've ultimately learned through my research metaphysically and academically, is that the devil is working for Yahweh. He's not a rebel against God. He is actually a lieutenant of Yahweh, a rather low-level, like I very often, and in my book, The Satanic Scream, but I've said this before, if Yahweh, who I believe is the truly evil being in the universe, Yahweh, the God of the three Abrahamic religions, is to me genuinely a malevolent demiurge in the Gnostic sense, the Satan is his thug who he sends to earth to make sure that you're loyal to him. That's what he does. He tempts you to make sure. He's like a narc testing you to see if you are loyal to Yahweh. So ironically, he couldn't be more the opposite, the real thing. He's not trying to lead people into damnation and evil. He's like the secret police of a dictator, making sure that you're loyal to God. So the reason I ultimately rejected my devil worship is because I understood he was not I don't want anything to do with Yahweh or the Abrahamic religions. And ultimately, to be a Satanist is to be connected deeply to a minor and not very powerful figure. He isn't an anti-God. He's not like this. He's never presented as that. So, but I am a stickler for authenticity and what the reality of things are. And I understand that most people are more interested in aesthetics and romanticism and the glamour of these things. They don't really care. But if you take spiritual things seriously and the consequences of it. So if you're saying you're a Satanist, you're basically a part of the Abrahamic religions. You're honoring God's deputy on earth. And the final thing I'll say about it for now, in Islam, interestingly, in the Quran, which is sort of a different perspective on the whole Abrahamic mythos, Iblis, which is the name of the devil in Islam, which comes from diabolis, the diabolical. In the legend of Iblis and his dealings with Allah, who is Yahweh, he doesn't like God's creation of Adam and Eve, or Adam Anifa, as it's called in Arabic. He thinks that these lowly creatures made of clay are not, as worthy of honor as the angels and the jinn. So he says to Allah, I don't really like these creatures, and I'm not going to bow down to them. Allah asks all of the beings in heaven to bow down to this new creation. He says, no, I don't trust them, I don't like them. And Allah says, okay, then you go to earth and test them, make sure that they don't sin. So in the Quran, interestingly, is a much more clear and accurate depiction of what the devil is. So that, I write at great depth about it in the Satanic Screen, but is that clear?
Yeah.
And Christians too have a totally wrong idea. There's nothing really in the Bible about this huge dualistic battle between good and evil, between the devil and God.
I have actually heard somebody else bring up the story of Job, sort of in the context that you did, like that the devil is working for God. It's not necessarily in those terms, but kind of like that. That the devil was told by God to go and test somebody, so obviously they are working together.
Absolutely. How can you read? Now, most Christians haven't read the Bible. Most Satanists stubbornly refuse to. Like Dr. Michael Aquino, the head of the Temple of Set, I would argue with him about this all the time, in a polite way at first, and then less politely. But I would say, if you don't read the Bible, how can you reject Yahweh, and how can you even talk about Satan or the devil, which it only comes from that tradition.
Yeah.
And if you read the book of Job, clearly the devil or the Satan is cooperating as an employee of God. He's following God's command to go to earth to tempt Job. And that, now in my encounters with the devil, that is exactly what I experienced. It was a being who was trying to tempt me. In my youth, I misunderstood that.
Would you call it a trickster spirit?
No, because a trickster is a very specific kind of metaphysical being, like Coyote or Tezcatlipoca or Set. No, he's not a trickster because he's deceiving you, but it's like if a vice squad person says, hey, do you want a whore? Do you want drugs? Do you want this? So they can arrest you. They're not trying to lead you into damnation. The Satanist is saying, well, like he says to Jesus in the Bible, all these things will I give you. I'll give you, women, knowledge, power, and Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan. He's tempting you. So he's not really a trickster. He's not trying to, a trickster is trying to reveal something about reality to you by pulling the carpet out from under you and shocking you. The devil is working for the establishment.
So he really has no power but to tempt you with things.
Right, that's
see
it.
if you react.
Exactly. He's a very minor figure. He's not, it's just ridiculous to think that he's this omnipotent being that evangelical Christianity has depicted him as.
And then we have the free will of choice.
Yes. Well, I mean, and I know many Christians who really think Satan rules this world. He's the king of the world, and we have to fight against his dark spell of sin and damnation. That's not even a part of the Christian religion, really. You know, that's a much later innovation. So, but you know, you could look at every spiritual tradition. You would find that what popular culture tells you is not the way the thing really is. And that's why my book, The Satanic Screen, I try to show how much of your ideas about the devil come from popular culture, from film, from literature, not really from religious tradition.
Yeah. Where can people find that book, The Satanic
Anywhere.
Screen?
You can find it everywhere. It's widely distributed, and it's on all the usual online book distributors.
Okay. One of the things I heard you touch about on Lucifer were tied back to feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expand more on that?
Well,
that's where we leave it, folks. What do Lucifer and the feminine have in common? How are they connected? Well, part 2 picks up right there. What do you make of that claim? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like the video, subscribe, and hit that bell so you're notified the second part 2 drops. Until next time, stay magical.